In this tax tutorial, you will learn about exemptions. And again, just a reminder that each exemption reduces the income that is subject to tax by whatever the exemption amount is. And there are actually going to be two types of exemptions we take a look at. The first is a personal exemption, and the second is a dependency exemption. In 2017, the exemption amount was $4,050. And it's important to note that only one exemption can be claimed per person, and an exemption for a particular person cannot be claimed on more than one tax return. So now we're going to break down these two types of exemptions. This is the exemptions portion of your 1040 tax form that you would fill out. Personal exemptions can be claimed for the taxpayer and spouse. So if you're single, you would have one exemption, and if you have a spouse, you could have two exemptions, one for yourself and one for your spouse. Now, there are some specific things that you need to have in order to claim a personal exemption for a spouse. First, you must be married by the last day of the year, or the spouse must have died during the year and the taxpayer must not have remarried. Or on a separate return, if you're married filing separately, the spouse must have no gross income. It's also important to note that a taxpayer cannot claim a personal exemption for themselves or their spouse if he or she can be claimed as a dependent on another tax return. The dependency tax exemption is directly located underneath the personal tax exemption portion on your 1040. Remember that the term dependent means a qualifying child or a qualifying relative. One exemption is allowed for each person claimed as a dependent on the tax return. So if you had two children, you could claim one exemption for each child. To claim a dependency exemption for a qualifying child or a qualifying relative, you do still need to meet the three tests. First, dependent taxpayer test. Second, joint return test. Third, citizen or residence test. Again, a taxpayer cannot claim an exemption for a person who is claimed as a dependent on another tax return. This is an example of a 1040 exemptions form for Brian and Sylvia Lyons, which you'll see under their filing status, they are married, filing jointly. Under the exemptions section, they've claimed one exemption for themselves and their spouse. And then you'll see they have claimed three dependent exemptions. Their two children, Jocelyn and Libby, which you'll see they're marked as daughters. And they've also claimed an exemption for Richard Hayes, who is a cousin. Richard earned this exemption because the Lyonses provided more than half of his support, and he is not claimed as a dependent on anyone else's return. So in total, they've claimed 5 exemptions, which you can see over here on the right. 2 for themselves, 2 for the children that live with them, and 1 for a qualifying relative.